Hello, Tim here, and welcome back to another painting video. This time I'm painting the Rockwell Island Lighthouse in Sitka, Alaska. Thanks very much to one of my Patreon members, Mary, for the kind sharing of this lovely photo. And it was a close candidate to our Alaska painting project where we are. We're doing a virtual trip around the world, and we're recently in Alaska. But this wasn't chosen by all the members to be the painted scene. So I think the main challenges of this scene, and it's certainly very suitable for watercolor, with the edges of the clouds. I'll come on to clouds in a minute, but composition-wise, I think with Mary's photo, the shoreline is just, for me, just a little bit too low. I fancy it being a little bit higher up, kind of that sort of region there. Next, we'll be trying to get a sense of depth. We can just about see a mountain over there on the right. I think this is a national park, or the local national park here. So a distant mountain over there, trying to think about the value and the coolness of the colors to push that back. Key thing is going to be these clouds, the low mist or whatever it is, and the mixture of hard edges, a little bit of a hard edge there, but predominantly soft edges at the base of the clouds or the mist, and there's lots of little pieces of cloud floating around there. So that kind of horizontal layer of cloud is going to present a bit of a challenge as regards how we do that with watercolor. Well, certainly a bit of wet in wet, but then as it dries, trying to get in some hard edges. So, and possibly a little bit of lifting off also. With the clouds, we want to also try and get a sense of the volume of the clouds. They are obviously three-dimensional, not two-dimensional, and the base of them has got, can I show you, the base of them, well, there and there's got a little bit of an ever so faint, soft edge up there. So yeah, I think that's going to present a little bit of a challenge. The next thing is trying to capture the character of the trees as well, those distinctive trees, the shape of the lighthouse, the rocks. Not sure about the water, doesn't really, it's sort of calm and not a lot going on, so I'll not make too much of a feature of that. Anyway, so I'm going to go through the whole painting process with you and try and give as much commentary along the way, and I welcome any feedback and comments from you. Any questions you got for me, pop that in the comments as well. So let's get to it. First of all, a little mention about the materials I'm using for this one. Normal paper, Saunders Waterford cold press paper, 15 inches by 11 inches. It's not stretched at all, taped down, and the colours I will go through as I get into the painting process. But the all-important drawing stage, getting in the outline drawing and starting with the shape of that dominant mountain on mainly the left-hand side. Now the little top of the lighthouse, this is going to be pretty much a focal point, so I need to get the position of it feeling about right in the overall composition. Starting with that pointed roof, try and keep it simple. The sides, they slant down a little bit, so it's got a thicker base than the top, and then the rocky island that it's sitting on, get the base, the shoreline, the water's edge correct there, bit of an overlapping rock in front of it. I think with these rocks, try and play around with the position of those rocks and introduce new ones, little ones, if you want little rocky outcrops, and try and get an interesting pattern of all of these different rocks interconnected with each other. Then on the left-hand side, again, overlap with the lighthouse island, and the water's edge just slopes down a little bit to the left on that left-hand side there. Now, the shapes of the outline of the trees coming from the left-hand side, just very loosely indicating the tops of those trees. Then we come across what I think is behind the island and then going over to the right-hand side, just covering the base of the right-hand mountain. A couple of windows for the lighthouse. Just beyond the island, there looks like there's a stretch of water to the distant area of land. Just straighten up these edges, make sure they're nice and solid so I can see them in the painting stage. To firm those little island there at the very front, I think that would just add a little bit of a balance to the scene. The kind of a structure just at the base of the lighthouse as well, but I don't want too much detail in there. It's quite bright with the white paint of that lighthouse. And there's actually a little bit of a base before the pointed top, so that's that there. And that's the drawing done. I haven't drawn in the edge of the clouds. I think that might leave in place as a pencil line showing through the light cloud, the light value of the cloud. So not bothering with that, just trying to imagine where it might be with the gaps in the outline of the mountain. So there's the brush I'm going to be painting most of my scene with, a Tintoretto 1407 brush, a size 6. And first of all, getting in a fairly greyish, moody sky, starting with a light wash. I haven't pre-wet the paper, and just dabbing the paint on. I'm going to get subtle variations in the thickness of the intensity of the colour here, but as it dries, it's going to go a lot lighter. Now the clouds, they are white-ish, but not bright white. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the paper. I might want to lift it out if I think I've gone a little bit too dark, but I'm just continuing from top to bottom with this greyish mixture, a blue, a brown, trying to introduce just subtle variations in colour. The palette of colours I'm using, the paints are from Mark Jackman in the UK, handmade professional quality paints, and my normal palette of colours from the top: neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, just painting gently around the lighthouse there. After cobalt blue, we've got ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red, cadmium orange, and then bottom left, cadmium yellow. And then over to the right, I've got lavender and some gouache colours. Right, a little bit of a warmer base for the rocky shoreline. And the little islands in the foreground of the scene. And I'm just basically covering the whole paper with some base colour, predominantly those cools, down to the shoreline. Now I can go in a little bit darker. Obviously the paper surface is still damp, as you can see with the glistening surface, the light, the reflection of my lights. So paper still damp, and now going in with a thicker mix of what I was using before. Burnt umber, ultramarine blue predominantly, and then I need to go in a little bit darker at the top, coming down to the tops of the mountains and eventually the low cloud that's coming into the scene. ultramarine blue, a little bit of cobalt blue as well, alizarin crimson, and then there's a little bit of darkness above the distant right-hand mountain. This type of brush, I think, for me is ideal just to create these sort of brush shapes and the very soft edges around the shape of those clouds. Now, it might be necessary just to pause now and again, just to check the dampness of your paper. And if it's buckled a bit, obviously it's going to be a little bit damper in the trough rather than the peak, if you see what I mean. So just watch out for that as you apply this thicker, darker mix. I'm now thinking about getting in the start of the right-hand mountain, and that's going to be cool, a cool blue, and trying to figure out where the left-hand edge of it's going to be, and going up, so the base of the mountain going up into those clouds. So trying to get a soft edge to the cloud, that's this layer of cloud that's covering that right-hand side, and an interesting shape of that cloud, the edge of the cloud as well. Going over to the left-hand side, just where we meet the main mountain. Just a little bit of darkness in between the clouds. Now you can see I'm a little bit thicker with my paint mix now. It's going to not move as much, and it will give me a little bit more of a harder edge. Right, now back over to the left-hand side, and the base of the clouds, the bottom of the main mountain, which for me will have a little bit more detail than the mountain on the right. It's closer to us, and we can just about make out in the photo the shapes of the trees, and then between the trees there's very cool, in the photo there's a very cool shadow, almost like a cobalt blue to me. Right, top of the mountain, got to have a hard edge to the top. Almost looks like, to me, it almost looks like a volcano type shape. I'm wondering if it is, or was, and is now an extinct volcano. Bit of a hard edge there, or a harder edge. I'm adding a bit of green into this main mountain because it's closer to us, and we can, as I say, we can just about see some of those trees. So a base colour for those greens, not so much at the top, but a little bit more at the base. Using my finger to partly lift off some of the paint at the top of the mountain, but just to get a bit of a soft edge as well. Continue on down to the bottom of the mountain, going over the edge of the trees, the middle ground trees, coming over from the left. Continue with the main mountain, and I've got it coming into almost to the top of the lighthouse. So it does actually go over in the source photo a little bit more. I've got my drawing with a little bit more of the right-hand mountain, not so much of the left-hand one. And now I'm thinking about the texture of these trees and picking up well, we've got to think more about the top of the mountain, that hard edge first of all. But there's two things about this mountain shape on the left. Trying to get in the soft edge of the cloud, and then those subtle sort of implication of very distant trees, that they're maybe a few kilometers away, a mile or so away, something like that. But this soft brush just gently flicking, almost a flicking motion from the cloud. Try not to get a hard edge, but from that cloud into the mountain. And now just strengthen up that hard edge on that right-hand side. It's almost like a lost and found edge on the right-hand side, where the mountain appears, then it disappears behind the clouds, and then reappears. A few vertical marks with the brush, maybe just trying to get the feeling of the vertical shapes of the trees. A little bit bluer at the base. Strengthen up the mountain on the right, just a little bit darker, and just a little bit of texture, tiny bit of green, not too much, just to give the sense of some vegetation all that distance away. Fingertips again, just moving the paint around. It's still quite damp in that cloud area. And this technique, I'm trying to get that, I described at the start, trying to get that little bit of shading, a bit of shadow at the base of the clouds. Trying to make them like fluffy balls of cotton wool, a bit of volume to them. And at the same time, trying to make them natural looking, not too perfectly formed, not too symmetrical. So very jagged edges, no symmetry to them. Bit of cloud coming down there, just introduce a few more gaps and cuts in the cloud. And with a soft brush, this 1/2 inch brush I'm using is from, I think it's from Raphael, but it's a very soft synthetic brush, and trying to use the roughness of the paper and not much paint on the brush, and just gently touching the surface, trying to deposit a little bit of paint there to get a very light feeling to a bit of form of those clouds. Now, while the background mountains are drying slowly, I could speed things up, of course, with a hairdryer, but while it's drying slowly, I'll come now to a separate part of the painting, the rocky shoreline, and that's got a little bit of warmth in it, those rocks, which is a nice contrast with the coolness behind. Just try and connect different shapes of the mountains before it finally dries. Sticking with or going back to the mop brush and a bit of yellow ochre for this shoreline, the base colour of the shoreline. And starting from the left-hand side, a little bit of burnt sienna as well to warm things up, yellow ochre, and I'm mixing it in that blue area, so it's going to give it a little bit of coolness. Continue over to the very end of this little headland, and then there's, beyond the island, I guess, is it on the mainland? I'm not sure, but on the other side of that body of water, we can see a thin slither of shoreline, rocky shoreline as well. Now the Rockwell Island Lighthouse base of the lighthouse. Try and get a fairly horizontal edge to the shoreline, the water's edge. Continue over. To the right-hand side, and then we need to do the middle rocks in the water. Same colour. Down to the base, fairly horizontal base, and this little one overlapping that bigger one. While the paint is still a little bit damp, I can go in with some darker paint just to introduce a little bit of texture, to it. Back to the main mountain and that cool shade between the individual trees, particularly noticeable down towards the bottom part of the mountain. The background mountain is still a little bit damp, so you've got to be careful here if your mountains are still wet, but trying to, with a sort of flicking motion and a flicking technique and a vertical stroke, trying to get in with the point of the brush and going upwards, trying to get that sort of shape of the shade between the individual trees. Now I don't want too many hard edges, so I am using my finger there just to, if I do notice a hard edge creeping in, I'll just smooth it out with my fingers. A little bit more of the blue stuff towards the bottom and a little bit towards the top as well. probably the main danger of doing what I'm doing is overworking. Firstly, overworking it, getting it too muddy in a way, and secondly, bringing it too far forwards from a sense of depth, the distance point of view. So I've got to be a little bit careful here. Keep applying little marks of blue just where I see fit. Sometimes you can spot a shadow between the greens and it looks like one tree next to another tree, and you can exploit that and just maybe strengthen the feeling of those two separate shapes side by side with that little bit of extra blue. So I'm just adding in a little bit more of the blue stuff. And I think also my mountain on the right just needs a bit of a hard edge on that right hand. On that right hand slope. I think I'll use the flat brush again for this to get that nice hard edge on that right hand side. A little bit of water, pick up some of this cool mix here. Ultramarine blue, and from the hard edge, from the edge of that mountain, come across that darker area. And then just with a fingertip, just smooth it out, just mix in the two together so I don't get a hard line appearing between those two shades of blue. Now, fast forward, I've done the water, the sea. I thought it was pretty boring to narrate that. And really all I did with the sea, with that bottom stretch of water, which is quite calm, but it's a sort of fairly wintry, greyish sea. It just add in that greyish mix, a tiny bit of warmth to it, light at the shoreline, and then coming gradually darker towards us so that it's not all one kind of value. And then just apply some soft waves while the surface is still quite damp. Just apply some soft horizontal waves into the scene just to give a little bit of texture, a bit of movement to the water. I've also added in a little bit more detail to the rocks with that 1/2" soft brush as well. So now we're ready to do a little bit of work on the trees. And with these trees, we've got some light greens and we've got some dark greens. Now, depending on the value of the main mountain on the left-hand side, which covers a majority of the scene, we've got to go a little bit darker than that. So if you have gone too dark with that middle mountain, then you've got to go darker still with these trees, a dark green. I'm using Viridian green here, and burnt umber and a little bit of neutral tint to get that dark, cool green of these trees. A little bit of spring green if I just want to add back in a lighter green to the mix. And with my, again, my mop brush. So the mixture here, there's not a lot of water in the brush. And I'm concentrating now on the shape of these trees and the silhouette of the top, many of the tops of the trees. And then as I go over, I'm going to have to think about the side of the trees, but trying to get in the impression of these trees and these lateral horizontal branches that come out. So using the tip of my brush, go along the tree edge, and just gradually come down from the top of the trees to their base, just gradually varying the intensity of these greens. So I added in a little bit of ultramarine blue in there just to add a bit of coolness. Take some time then, if you're doing this one, take some time over these trees and study the photo as well. The edge of the trees, the tops of the trees, particularly these on the left-hand side and over to the right, or just behind the lighthouse where they're a little bit closer to us. Virgin green, spring green. Just notice in the source photo there's a cool green tree. Looks like just above the rocks. Now, as we come down to the rocks, I'm going to have to think about the edge. And I'm going to go for mainly a hardish edge, the base of the trees where they meet the rocks, and try and get in the edge. I'm creating now the edge of those rocks, so a nice jagged edge, not too perfect. Darker mix, generally a little bit darker as I come down to the base of these trees. Carefully going across. Neutral tint, burnt umber, ultramarine blue. If you have any lightness in the background, then you can emphasize those contrasts by going in darker with your trees, just to make them stand out a little bit more. for example, the clouds, bit of light, so we can just go in a bit darker there and have a tree connecting with that low cloud. Spring green, Viridian green. This middle stretch of trees, they're, I think, further away at the base, well, just above the shoreline. And I don't want to be as strong with these trees as I am on the left-hand side, not so dark. Ultramarine blue, Viridian green. Down to the tops of the rocks in the distance, and because of the distance, the height of the rocks from the water's edge to the base of the trees, that's going to be a shorter distance, so that will just a little bit help with the sense of distance and depth to that middle area. Really, you're spending most of your time painting the tops of the trees rather than the actual body of the trees and the base of the trees. That's quite quick. But the important thing is as we come into that skyline and as they're silhouetted against a lighter background, just concentrate on those laterals. Almost halfway there across the scene. Over that distant shoreline, and we are gradually coming to the lighthouse, which, if I go quite dark with the trees, that's going to stand out even more. So a little bit of careful painting will be needed around that. The tops of these trees here, they do show out a lot more than those on the left, although those on the left are still a little bit damp, so they're not showing up too much against the background. There's still a little bit damp on the left, but these on the right showing up a good bit more. Ultramarine blue, Viridian green, spring green. Just lightly with the tip of the brush, creating the tops of those trees. And also some of the trees, some of them are a little bit more sort of full-bodied, where others are quite bare of side branches. Right, left-hand side of the lighthouse, and create that little bit of tapered edge down to the bottom, and the base of the lighthouse it's got a sort of, at the bottom, some sort of extensional roof, but don't think I'll put that in, but there is a sort of whitish building or square on the left hand side, so I'll put that in. Then down the right hand side of the top of the lighthouse, with the outline of these trees on the right, it's a trap I often fall into. The shape of the top edge of the tree is sort of following the contour of any object that is going around, if you see what I mean. For example, the top of the lighthouse, trying to make sure we're not following in like a parallel line exactly that profile of the lighthouse. A little bit lighter green on the right hand side, just varying these shades of green. And also the trees, don't make them evenly spaced as well. Some are closer together than others. Leave a few gaps. There actually is a gap. Looks like there's some sort of building on the distant shoreline to the left of the lighthouse. But to me, it's just, if I painted that in, it would be that the viewer might think, what on earth is that shape behind the trees? That light thing behind the trees. So I've not bothered putting that in. And also on the distant shore, there looks like there's some sort of dwelling or a low-rise building, cabin or something like that, maybe, on the left-hand side. So haven't bothered doing that either. Getting the tops of the trees on the right, and then fairly quickly now the body of these trees with my zigzaggy motion of my brush, just going down to the base, and I get a bit darker at the base of the trees, down to the tops of the rocks. Neutral tint, ultramarine blue for the base, and then I get a soft transition from the green to the darker base. Now I have left a few little specks of the light paper behind. I don't want too many of those, but maybe just a few will give a bit of an extra sparkle to the scene. There's a danger with so much green, it can get a little bit overwhelming. You've got to, with these large areas of green, well, a large area of any single colour or value, you've got to try and make it a bit more interesting by adding in texture or different values, or green here, different shades of green, light green, dark green. A few trees just a little bit higher than the others. They're showing up quite well in the middle of that distant mountain, where it's kind of like a lighter blue. Then the trees there, a bit darker. So they show up a little bit more. back to the left, which is now dried a little bit more, and a darker colour to define the shade within the trees just a little bit more. And as it's drying a little bit more on the left, it's showing up a little bit easier, the darker values against the distant main mountain. What might be quite nice, this very right-hand tree when you do it, you could make it just lean a little bit more to the right, so it's sort of leaning into the scene. I think that would be quite attractive. That one, though, I'm just painting now. That's kind of the last tree on in that area, but just have it leaning a bit into the scene. I think that'd be quite nice from a composition point of view. Smaller brush now, my synthetic round brush, and this water, I skipped past it earlier because it wasn't very interesting to watch me just paint an area of grey, but just a few little waves, thin waves. Now I'm using this small synthetic brush, which is sometimes a good brush to create that shape, but probably a better brush is the one I'm using now. This is a Princeton long round brush and really good at creating these little thin wave shapes. A medium amount of paint on the brush, but you've still got that tip to the brush. You can still see the sort of profile of the brush, and then just lightly touching the paper and then lifting off, creating these shapes, mainly horizontal. And just rub something out if I quickly make a little mistake. But going across, connect the shapes as well. In the distance, they're going to be thinner, narrower lines, but as we come towards us, they can be closer together and also thicker. The actual value of these lines is just a little bit darker than the base colour of the water I'm painting on, so just a little bit darker. I don't want it standing out too much. When you look at the photo, if you blink, you just you'd miss them. You just wouldn't really notice them at all. But just a little thin, these little thin lines, just slightly darker than the water. I think it's just about right. Just if you're not, don't overdo it though. A few more down in the bottom right-hand corner. Just suggest the some gentle waves on the water, so fairly calm conditions, I guess. Small brush, burnt umber, neutral tint, and a stronger line to the water's edge. Bit of cerulean blue and a little bit of coolness to these lines. Try and soften up the edge with the edge between the rocks and the base of the trees just a little bit, so it's not all kind of fairly monotonous. Now, darker water's edge to the lighthouse island, and the closest rock, and then the one behind it. A little bit of form to the surface of the rocks as well. Maybe could be seaweed or something like that. Soften up the edge. I just picked up a bit of, well, dirty water just to soften that edge a little bit between the rocks and the trees. There's this lightish tree over on the left. Some sort of different, it looks like some sort of different conifer or spruce or cedar, but a lighter green there. I think it looks better on that left-hand side like that because it's just showing something different in amongst all those trees. So I picked a bit of light green here, spring green, and adding in, again, as I look at the photo too much, and sometimes it can be dangerous looking at a photo too much because you can pick up on too much detail. Like I could begin to see tree trunks and that sort of thing appearing, but just a few little areas of lighter green here and there. Now the top of the lighthouse is red, but not bright red. I've got to make it fairly light on the top, but then a bit darker just below the top, below its sort of hat. So this here is going to be a darker red. But a little bit, just a bit lighter, value-wise, a little bit lighter than the trees behind. And a reddish, brownish base to the lighthouse. Connect that with the island. And the sides of the lighthouse now, to me, it's a round lighthouse, but it would appear too flat if I didn't add in a little bit of soft shadow on the left and the right. Just try and make it appear a little bit more circular. Left and right. You can also soften up the edges there as well a little bit, just to push it back. Bit of a lighter red now for the hat, the top of the lighthouse. A light red, quite a bit of water in that, light red. And some windows, that one there, the top one, and then another one further down, and then something on the base of the lighthouse. Could be figures, could be a doorway. Well, I've got this brush, just add in a few little marks here and there. Just picking up on different darks within those rocks, just to add a bit of interest, a bit more texture to those rocks. So just to recap on those rocks, it was sort of yellow ochre, burnt sienna base, and then a cool blue for the darker areas of the rocks, and then a dark base with a darker value, and just here and there, as I'm doing now, a bit of seaweed or something like that draped over the top of these rocks. Go a little bit darker on this tip here, just to strengthen that. The end bit that's coming out into the water. Now I'm sort of hesitating with the brush, and that can be a good indication that I'm in the closing phases of the painting. If I'm just can't figure out what to do next, probably the best course of action is to stop. Still quite wet with those trees on the left. Bit of blue for those distant trees, pushes them back a bit more, soften up the edge. Pick up that light green and some yellow, light yellow gouache. So I can go a little bit thicker with this green. Now I've got to be careful here, just adding a bit of light colour to this, see what it looks like. Just where there might be a bit of light catching it or younger foliage coming out. Bit more on that left-hand side as well. Just a few little specks of green on that darker tree. Some in the distance as well. Yeah, so I think I'm done, and we'll go to give myself a little critique. So Rockwell Island Lighthouse in Sitka, Alaska. Thanks again to Mary for the kind sharing of her source photo. And the key objectives here, going back to what I said at the beginning, trying to get the composition right, the position of the lighthouse there. I moved up the shoreline from Mary's photo. The waterline was down here, so I moved that up. I think that worked a little bit better. I think composition-wise, because I was then obviously giving myself a good bit more water to play with, I think with the benefit of hindsight, I reckon if I put in a little boat in here, maybe some sort of small boat and someone at the back of the boat just sort of, and it's going from left to right, so it's sort of going into that, maybe that little bay in there. But I think that would be maybe a little bit bigger than that, but that might be an interesting element if you're doing this, to put in some little small boat there and a person, one or two people in that boat, just a little outboard motor just slowly moving from left to right. Other than that, I moved the mountain. That mountain there could, as in the source photo, could perhaps go down a little bit more like that, but it's okay. The other aspect was the right-hand mountain that's further away, so push that back. And then the big thing, these clouds, and trying to get the soft edge to those clouds. But then behind that, we've got harder edges of the sides of the mountain. So that kind of worked out all right. Just be careful of any pencil lines showing through. I've got a little bit of pencil line there. That can be avoided, but we've got a hard edge there, hard edge there, and a hard edge there. That's sort of come out. Okay, a little bit of hard edge there as well, so that's okay. And then the texture, be careful not to overdo the texture. I was veering on, I should really have kept that a little bit lighter, because then these foreground trees would stand out a little bit more. So just be careful with that. So lighter on the right-hand mountain, pushing it back, maybe more of a middle value for this nearby mountain. Perhaps a bit darker at the top though, because it's receiving less light, so a little bit darker up there. But then these trees, they sort of come out right, but you just got to keep with those laterals. There's lots of side branches that come out of these trees. And as I say, you could have this right-hand one sort of leaning over a little bit as well. The rocks have come out all right, could go a bit stronger with a darker value along the water's edge. Again, just be careful of the pencil line showing through. A bit of pencil line there. Lighthouse is okay, just the right kind of, it's in proportion to it. Might have gone a little bit too light with that green there at the end. So danger, you hit the end and then you start adding in too much detail, and it doesn't actually add anything to the scene. But value-wise, now those trees, they stand out all right because they're against a lighter background. They're just sort of almost touching the lower part of that cloud there. And again, over on that left-hand side over there, that's sort of all right there. And getting some interesting, I quite like the brush marks that I got with the mop brush with a pointy end to it. Varying the shades of green as well, and a bit of coolness down there with that lighter bush, but little dabs of blue for those distant trees. Could have softened that edge there because it's further away. Could do that now if I wanted to by a little soft brush, dampened, and then just gently tease that edge. But overall, quite pleased. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a go at these soft clouds. And if you're on Patreon, share your painting with all of the Patreon members so we can all take a look and see how you got on. So good luck with that, and I'll catch up with you on the next video. Cheers for now. Bye.